Sarah Martinez wiped down the counter for the third time that morning, her sleeve riding up to reveal the intricate tattoo that wrapped around her forearm. The eagle's wings seemed to shimmer under the coffee shop's warm lighting, its talons gripping a ribbon that bore the words Semper Fidelis in elegant script. Below it, coordinates marked a place that meant everything to her, though most people who saw it never bothered to ask what they represented. The morning rush at Brew & Bean was in full swing, and Sarah moved efficiently between the espresso machine and the register. At 28, she had been working at the coffee shop for nearly 2 years, ever since returning to civilian life. The job wasn't glamorous, but it helped pay the bills while she finished her degree in social work. More importantly, it gave her a sense of routine that she desperately needed. "Next!" she called out, forcing a smile as she looked up at the customer approaching the counter. It was Mrs. Henderson, a regular who always ordered a large vanilla latte with extra foam. But today, Mrs. Henderson wasn't alone. She was accompanied by 2 other women from what Sarah recognized as the local book club that met every Tuesday morning. "Oh, my!" said the woman to Mrs. Henderson's left, her eyes immediately drawn to Sarah's tattoo as she reached for her wallet. "That's quite the artwork you have there, dear." Sarah's smile faltered slightly, but she maintained her professional demeanor. "Thank you. What can I get for you ladies today?" "I'll have my usual," Mrs. Henderson said quickly, clearly trying to move past the awkward moment. But her companions weren't ready to let it go. "You know," the third woman chimed in, loud enough for other customers to hear, "I just don't understand why young people feel the need to mark up their bodies like that. It's so unprofessional." Sarah felt her cheeks burning as conversations around the coffee shop began to quiet. She could feel eyes turning toward her and the familiar weight of judgment settling on her shoulders. "1 vanilla latte with extra foam," she said to Mrs. Henderson, trying to keep her voice steady. But the women weren't finished. The first one leaned closer to the counter, lowering her voice in a way that somehow made her words carry even further. "I mean, what kind of establishment hires people who look like that? My granddaughter comes in here sometimes. What kind of example is this setting?" "It's probably some gang symbol," whispered the third woman, not quite quietly enough. "You know how these young people are these days. No respect for themselves or others." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she worked the espresso machine, the familiar hiss of steam doing little to drown out their continued comments. She had heard it all before, but it never got easier. The assumptions, the judgments, the way people looked at her ink and immediately decided who she was without knowing anything about her story. "I heard they can't even get real jobs with those things," one of them continued. "That's why she's working here instead of doing something meaningful with her life." The words hit harder than Sarah expected. Something meaningful with her life. If only they knew. If only any of them knew what those symbols on her arm really represented, what she had sacrificed, what she had lost, what she had given to serve her country. Behind her, she could hear her manager, Derek, approaching. He was a good guy in his early 30s who had always been fair to her, but she worried about how this scene might affect her job. Small businesses couldn't afford to lose customers over employee appearance issues, and she knew that complaints about her tattoos had come up before. "Is everything all right here?" Derek asked, his tone carefully neutral as he stepped up beside Sarah. "Oh, yes," said the first woman, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We were just having a discussion about professional appearance standards. I think it's wonderful that you're willing to give people chances, but perhaps there should be some guidelines about appropriate presentation." Derek's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and Sarah appreciated that he seemed to be fighting his own internal battle about how to handle the situation. She didn't want to put him in a difficult position. "We were just finishing up," Mrs. Henderson said quickly, shooting her companions a warning look. "Sarah, dear, could I get that latte to go? We really should be getting to our meeting." As Sarah prepared the drink, she could feel the eyes of other customers on her. Some looked sympathetic, others curious, and a few seemed to share the book club women's disapproval. It was the kind of attention she hated, the kind that made her want to pull her sleeves down and hide the art that meant everything to her. The coffee shop's bell chimed as new customers entered, and Sarah looked up to see a group of business people in expensive suits. Great, she thought, more potential judgment. The morning was shaping up to be particularly challenging. "Here's your latte, Mrs. Henderson," Sarah said, handing over the cup with a forced smile. "Thank you, dear," the older woman replied, and there was something apologetic in her eyes as she glanced at her companions. As the book club women gathered their things and headed toward their usual corner table, Sarah heard one of them say, "Well, I suppose everyone deserves a chance, but really, there should be some standards." The businessman at the front of the group stepped up to the counter, and Sarah braced herself for another round of comments. He was probably in his 50s. With graying hair and the kind of confident bearing that suggested he was used to being in charge. His expensive watch caught the light as he reached for his phone to check something. "Good morning," Sarah said, her voice perhaps a bit too bright in compensation for her rattled nerves. "What can I get started for you?" The man looked up from his phone, and his eyes immediately went to her tattoo. Sarah held her breath, waiting for the familiar look of disapproval or the subtle step backward that often accompanied people's first glimpse of her ink. But instead, something shifted in the man's expression. His eyes lingered on the eagle, tracing the careful lines and shading that had taken the artist hours to complete. Then his gaze moved to the coordinates, and Sarah could have sworn she saw something like recognition flicker across his features. "That's beautiful work," he said quietly, and his voice carried a weight that made Sarah look at him more carefully. "Thank you," she replied, genuinely surprised by his response. The man's companions, 3 other business professionals, had moved up behind him, and Sarah could see them exchanging glances as they noticed what had captured their colleagues' attention. One of them, a younger man in a navy suit, made a subtle gesture that might have been an eye roll. "Marcus, we really should order and get going," said a woman in a sharp black blazer. "The presentation is at 10 and we still need to review the numbers." But Marcus, apparently that was his name, didn't seem to be in any hurry. He was still studying Sarah's tattoo with an intensity that made her slightly uncomfortable. It wasn't the judgmental stare she was used to, but it was equally penetrating. "Those coordinates," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is that—" Sarah felt her heart rate pick up. Very few people recognized the significance of the numbers tattooed below the eagle. Most assumed they were random decorative elements, but occasionally someone would see them and understand immediately what they represented. "Marcus," the woman in the blazer said again, more insistently this time, "we really do need to order." The man blinked, seeming to come back to the present moment. "Of course, sorry." He turned to Sarah with an apologetic smile. "Could I get a large black coffee, please?" "Absolutely," Sarah replied, grateful for the return to normal customer interaction. As she prepared his order, she could feel him watching her, and she wondered what he was thinking. The coordinates on her arm marked a forward operating base in Afghanistan, a place where she had served, where she had lost friends, where she had learned what it truly meant to sacrifice for something bigger than yourself. Most people who saw her tattoo assumed it was decorative, maybe even meaningless. They saw a young woman with ink and made assumptions about her character, her values, her worth. But occasionally, very rarely, someone would look at those numbers and understand their significance. Those people usually fell into one of 2 categories: veterans who recognized military coordinates when they saw them, or family members who had lost someone overseas and had memorized every detail about where their loved one had served. Sarah handed over the black coffee, and when Marcus took it from her, their fingers brushed briefly. His hands, she noticed, bore small scars that looked like they might have come from years of handling rough equipment or working in harsh conditions. "Thank you," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her look up and meet his eyes. They were kind eyes, she realized, but also tired in a way that seemed familiar. "Have a good day," she replied, meaning it more than usual. As Marcus and his group found a table near the window, Sarah tried to focus on the next customer in line, but she found herself glancing over at the business group, particularly at Marcus, who seemed to be having trouble concentrating on whatever presentation materials his colleagues were discussing. The morning continued with its usual rhythm of orders and conversations, but Sarah noticed that Marcus kept looking in her direction, not in a way that felt intrusive or inappropriate, but with a kind of thoughtful curiosity that she couldn't quite interpret. Around 10:30, the coffee shop had quieted down as the morning rush ended, and the lunch crowd was still hours away. Sarah was restocking the pastry case when she heard Derek calling her name. "Sarah, could you come here for a moment?" She looked up to see him standing near the register with a concerned expression. Her heart sank, wondering if the earlier incident with the book club women had resulted in a formal complaint. "Is everything okay?" she asked, approaching the counter. "Mrs. Henderson just called," Derek said, and Sarah's stomach dropped. "She wanted to apologize for her friend's behavior this morning. Apparently she gave them quite an earful after they left." Relief flooded through Sarah. "Oh, that's really kind of her. She also wanted me to tell you that she thinks you're one of the best employees we've ever had, and that anyone who judges you based on your appearance is missing out on knowing a wonderful person." Sarah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. It was rare for customers to follow up with such kindness, especially after their friends had been so cruel. "That means a lot," she said softly. Derek nodded, then glanced around the nearly empty coffee shop. "Why don't you take your break? It's quiet, and I think you could use a few minutes." Sarah gratefully accepted the offer and headed to the small employee break room behind the counter. It wasn't much, just a couple of chairs, a small table, and a refrigerator, but it was private, and right now that was exactly what she needed. She sat down and rolled up her sleeve to look at her tattoo properly. The eagle's wings stretched across her forearm, its fierce expression a reminder of strength in the face of adversity. Below it, the coordinates were etched in precise military-style numbers, the exact location where her unit had been stationed during her second deployment to Afghanistan. Most people who saw it assumed it was just decorative art, maybe a symbol of American patriotism taken too far. They didn't know that the eagle represented the 101st Airborne Division, where she had served as a medic for 4 years. They didn't know that those coordinates marked the place where she had saved lives, lost friends, and learned what it truly meant to serve something greater than herself. Sarah traced the numbers with her finger, remembering the day she had gotten the tattoo. It was 6 months after her discharge, during a period when she was struggling to adjust to civilian life. The nightmares were frequent then, and she often felt disconnected from the world around her. Getting the tattoo had been her way of ensuring she never forgot where she came from, what she had done, and who she had lost along the way. The artist had asked her about the significance of the design, and she had explained that it was a memorial as much as it was a marker of service. He had worked on it for hours, taking extra care with every detail, refusing payment when she tried to tip him. "For what you've done," he had said simply. "This one's on the house." Now, sitting in the break room of a coffee shop, dealing with customers who saw her ink as a sign of poor character or questionable judgment, Sarah sometimes wondered if she should have chosen a less visible location for the tattoo. It would have been easier to hide it, to avoid the stares and comments and assumptions that came with wearing her service so openly. But then she remembered why she had chosen her forearm in the first place. It wasn't hidden because her service wasn't something she was ashamed of. The men and women she had served with, the patients she had treated, the friends she had lost, They deserved to be remembered, and hiding that memorial felt like a betrayal of their sacrifice. A soft knock on the break room door interrupted her thoughts. "Sarah?" Derek's voice called. "There's someone here who'd like to speak with you." Confused, Sarah stood up and smoothed down her shirt. She wasn't expecting anyone, and it was unusual for Derek to interrupt her break unless there was an emergency. When she emerged from the break room, she was surprised to see Marcus standing at the counter. His business colleagues were gone, and he had shed his suit jacket, revealing a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up. "I hope you don't mind," he said, his voice carrying a slight nervous energy. "I told my colleagues I'd catch up with them later. I was hoping we could talk for a moment." Sarah glanced at Derek, who shrugged and moved to give them some privacy. "Of course," she said. "What can I do for you?" Marcus took a deep breath, and when he rolled up his left sleeve, Sarah's world shifted. There, on his forearm, was a tattoo that made her heart stop. It was a Marine Corps emblem, beautifully detailed, with coordinates below it that she recognized immediately. They were different from hers, but close, very close. Close enough to indicate that they had served in the same region, possibly during overlapping deployments. But it was what she saw when he rolled up his right sleeve that made her gasp audibly. The names. At least a dozen names tattooed in careful script along his inner forearm, each one representing a Marine who hadn't made it home. "Colonel Marcus Rodriguez, United States Marine Corps, retired," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of years and loss and service. "And those coordinates on your arm? I know that place, I know it very well." Sarah stared at Colonel Rodriguez's tattoos, her mind racing as she processed what she was seeing. The Marine Corps emblem was expertly done, with rich detail that spoke of both pride and remembrance. But it was the list of names that made her breath catch in her throat. She recognized some of them. "Henderson," she whispered, reading one of the names. "Staff Sergeant Michael Henderson. He was one of yours?" Marcus nodded, his expression growing somber. "He was. Lost him in an IED attack about 3 clicks from your coordinates. You knew him?" "He was brought to our aid station," Sarah said, her voice barely audible. "I was the medic I tried to save him. We tried everything, but..." The weight of that day came flooding back. Staff Sergeant Henderson had been conscious when they brought him in, asking about his men, worried about his team even as his own life was slipping away. Sarah had worked on him for 47 minutes, refusing to give up even when the other medics said it was hopeless. She remembered the exact time he died because she had looked at the clock, wanting to record every detail for the report she would have to write later. "You were there," Marcus said, and it wasn't a question. "You were the medic." Sarah nodded, unable to speak around the sudden tightness in her throat. In all the years since her discharge, she had never met someone who had a personal connection to one of the soldiers she had treated. The military was vast, deployments were scattered, and the chances of such a meeting were astronomical. Derek, sensing the gravity of the conversation, quietly moved to the other end of the counter and busied himself with inventory, giving them privacy while staying close enough to help if needed. "He talked about you," Marcus continued, his voice gentle but carrying an undertone of emotion. "In the letters he sent home to his wife. He mentioned a medic who had been especially kind to some of his men during previous visits to the aid station, said she had this way of making everyone feel like they mattered, like their stories were important." Sarah felt tears building in her eyes. She remembered Michael Henderson clearly now, not just from that final, terrible day, but from several previous occasions when he had accompanied wounded Marines to the aid station. He had always stayed with his men, holding their hands, talking them through procedures, making sure they knew they weren't alone. "He was a good man," she managed to say. "He never left anyone behind." "No, he didn't," Marcus agreed. "That's what got him killed, actually." He went back for a wounded Marine who was trapped in the blast zone. Managed to get the kid out alive, but took shrapnel in the process. I remember that Marine, Sarah said suddenly. Private Collins. He had a punctured lung and extensive burns on his legs. We stabilized him and got him to the field hospital. Collins made it home, Marcus confirmed. Got married last year. Has a baby daughter now. None of that would have happened without Henderson's sacrifice, and without the medics who saved Collins's life. The conversation was interrupted by the coffee shop's bell as new customers entered. Sarah glanced up automatically, her professional instincts kicking in, but Marcus touched her arm gently. Would you be able to talk more when you get off work? He asked. I know this is a lot to process and I don't want to keep you from your job, but I'd really like to hear more about your service if you're comfortable sharing. Sarah looked at Derek, who had been listening to enough of the conversation to understand its significance. Go ahead and take the rest of your shift off, he said without being asked. Katie's coming in early today anyway, and it's slow enough that I can handle things until she gets here. Are you sure? Sarah asked, grateful but not wanting to leave Derek short-handed. Absolutely. This is more important than coffee sales. 20 minutes later, Sarah and Marcus were sitting in a small park across the street from the coffee shop. Sarah had changed out of her work apron and into a light jacket, though she kept her sleeves rolled up. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't trying to hide her tattoo. How long were you deployed? Marcus asked as they settled onto a bench overlooking a small pond. 2 tours, Sarah replied. First one was 13 months, second was 15. I was with the 101st Airborne, attached to various units as needed. That's a long time for a medic, Marcus observed. Most medical personnel do shorter rotations. I volunteered to extend, Sarah explained. My team was good, we worked well together, and honestly, I felt like I was making a difference. It was hard to leave when I knew there were people who still needed help. Marcus nodded in understanding. I did 4 tours over 8 years. Started as a lieutenant, worked my way up to colonel. Each time I came home, I felt like I was leaving my Marines behind. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching ducks move across the pond's surface. It was the kind of peaceful scene that seemed almost surreal after the intense conversation they had been having. Can I ask you about the coordinates? Marcus said eventually. You don't have to if it's too personal, but I'd like to understand what that place meant to you. Sarah took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts. It wasn't a story she told often, but something about Marcus's presence made it feel safe to share. That forward operating base was where I served during my second deployment, she began. It was supposed to be a relatively quiet assignment, mostly routine medical care, minor injuries, the occasional emergency evacuation. But things escalated quickly during the summer of my tour. I remember that summer, Marcus said grimly. We lost a lot of good people. The base came under attack multiple times, Sarah continued. Mortar fire, small arms, a few attempts at infiltration. But the worst was a coordinated assault that lasted for 6 hours. We had wounded coming in faster than we could treat them, and we were running low on supplies. Marcus turned to face her more fully, his attention completely focused on her words. I was working on a Marine, Lance Corporal Davis, when shrapnel from a mortar round came through the medical tent. Davis took a piece of metal to the chest, and I took one to the leg. But I couldn't stop working on him because he would have died. So you kept treating him while you were wounded? Sarah nodded. For another 2 hours. By the time the attack ended and we could get proper help, I had lost enough blood that they had to evacuate me to the field hospital. Davis made it, though. He's doing well now. We exchanged Christmas cards. That's why you got the tattoo, Marcus said with sudden understanding. Not just to remember the place, but to remember what you were capable of when it mattered most. Partly, Sarah agreed. But also to remember the people who didn't make it. That base. It was where I learned that being a medic meant more than just treating injuries. It meant being willing to hold someone's hand while they died, or sing to a scared 19-year-old while you worked on his wounds, or keep working even when your own body was telling you to stop. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing her story. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "The names on my arm," he said, rolling up his sleeve again. "They represent 8 years of deployments, 8 years of losing Marines who trusted me to bring them home safely." Sarah studied the names more carefully now. Some were familiar from casualty reports and memorial services, others were unknown to her. But each one represented a life cut short, a family destroyed, a future that would never be realized. "Do you ever wonder if it was worth it?" she asked quietly. "Every day," Marcus admitted. "Some days I think about all the lives we saved, all the missions we completed successfully, all the Marines who did make it home because of decisions we made. Other days, all I can think about are the ones we lost." "The guilt is the hardest part," Sarah said. "Not survivor's guilt exactly, but the feeling that you should have been able to save everyone. That if you had been smarter, or faster, or better at your job, fewer names would be on that memorial wall." "You understand," Marcus said, and there was relief in his voice. "Most people don't. They say things like, 'You did your best,' or 'It wasn't your fault,' but they don't really get it." "They mean well," Sarah said diplomatically. "But unless you've been there, unless you've held responsibility for other people's lives in a combat zone, you can't really understand the weight of it." They were interrupted by Sarah's phone buzzing with a text message. She glanced at it and smiled slightly. "Derek," she explained, "making sure I'm okay and letting me know that Mrs. Henderson came back to the coffee shop specifically to apologize again. Apparently, she told Derek that she's never been more embarrassed by her friend's behavior." "Those women this morning," Marcus said, and there was a hint of steel in his voice. "They had no idea who they were talking to." "Most people don't," Sarah said with a shrug. "They see the tattoo and make assumptions. They think it means I'm rebellious or unprofessional, or that I don't have respect for myself." "It's their loss," Marcus said firmly. "Anyone who looks at you and sees anything other than someone who served her country with honor is blind." Sarah felt a warmth spreading in her chest that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. It had been a long time since someone had looked at her service record and seen valor instead of just another veteran struggling to adjust to civilian life. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Why did you approach me today? I mean, I'm grateful that you did, but it was a risk. You didn't know how I'd react to a stranger asking about my service." Marcus considered the question carefully. "When I saw your tattoo, I recognized the coordinates immediately. I spent enough time in that region to know every major base and outpost. But what really caught my attention was the eagle design. It's not just any eagle, it's specifically the 101st Airborne Eagle, and it's positioned in a way that suggests you understood military heraldry when you had it done. The artist was a veteran too," Sarah explained. "He made sure every detail was accurate. Then when I heard those women making assumptions about you, about your character and your work ethic, I got angry, really angry, because I could see from your tattoo that you had served and probably served with distinction, but they were looking at you like you were some kind of troublemaker." Sarah smiled at his protective instincts. "So you decided to set the record straight?" "I decided to find out if my instincts were right," Marcus corrected. "And they were. You're not just a veteran, you're exactly the kind of person I was proud to serve alongside." As the afternoon wore on, they shared more stories about their service, about the challenges of returning to civilian life, about the ways military experience had shaped their worldviews. Sarah learned that Marcus had struggled with his own adjustment period, including a bout with PTSD that had nearly cost him his marriage. "My wife didn't understand why I couldn't just move on from my deployments," he explained. "She thought that coming home meant leaving all of that behind. It took couples therapy and a lot of honest conversations before she realized that the military experiences weren't something I could just compartmentalize and forget. "Are you still married?" Sarah asked. Marcus nodded. 23 years next month. It took work, but we figured it out. She's actually the one who suggested I get the tattoos. She said I needed a way to honor the Marines I lost without carrying their ghosts around in my head all the time. Did it help? More than I expected it to, Marcus admitted. Having their names somewhere visible reminds me to live in a way that honors their sacrifice, rather than just feeling guilty about surviving when they didn't. As the sun began to set, they realized they had been talking for nearly 4 hours. The park had filled with families and joggers enjoying the pleasant evening, and Sarah felt more relaxed than she had in months. "I should probably head home," she said reluctantly. "Early shift tomorrow." "Of course," Marcus said, standing up from the bench. "I'm really glad we had this conversation, Sarah. It's not often you meet someone who truly understands the weight of military service." "I'm glad too," Sarah replied honestly. "It's been therapeutic, I guess. I don't often get to talk about my deployment experiences with someone who was there, who understands the context." Marcus reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card. "I work in veteran services now," he explained, "helping former military personnel adjust to civilian careers and deal with service-related challenges. If you ever want to talk more, or if you know other veterans who might benefit from our programs, please give me a call." Sarah took the card and studied it. Marcus Rodriguez, Director of Veterans Transition Services. The address was for an office downtown that she recognized as being part of a larger nonprofit organization. "You're helping other veterans find their place in civilian life," she observed. "Trying to," Marcus said. "It's challenging work, but it feels like a way to continue serving, just in a different capacity." As they walked back toward the coffee shop where Sarah's car was parked, she found herself thinking about the unexpected turn her day had taken. She had started the morning dealing with judgment and assumptions from customers who saw her tattoos as evidence of poor character. She was ending it with a new connection to someone who not only understood her service, but respected it. "Marcus," she said as they reached her car, "thank you. For understanding, for sharing your story, for seeing my tattoo for what it really represents." "Thank you for your service," he replied. And the words carried weight because they came from someone who had served alongside people like her. "And thank you for trusting me with your story." As Sarah drove home that evening, she found herself thinking about the conversation with a lightness she hadn't felt in a long time. For once, her tattoos had been the beginning of understanding rather than judgment, connection rather than criticism. She pulled into her driveway and sat in the car for a moment, looking down at her forearm. The eagle's wings seemed to catch the streetlight, and the coordinates below remained as precise and meaningful as ever. But tonight, instead of feeling like a burden or a source of unwanted attention, her tattoos felt like what they were meant to be. A bridge between her military service and her civilian life. A reminder of strength and sacrifice and the bonds formed between people who had shared extraordinary experiences. Tomorrow she would go back to work at the coffee shop, and there would likely be more customers who looked at her tattoos and made assumptions. But now she had a reminder that not everyone saw them that way. Some people, the right people, would see them for what they really were. Marks of honor, symbols of service, and evidence of a young woman who had given her best years to protecting others. The business card Marcus had given her was still in her hand, and she looked at it thoughtfully. Maybe it was time to think about whether serving coffee was really how she wanted to spend the rest of her career. Maybe there were other ways to serve, other ways to use the skills and experiences she had gained during her time in the military. But those were thoughts for another day. Tonight she was simply grateful for an unexpected encounter that had reminded her that her service mattered, that her sacrifices had meaning, and that the right people would always see past surface judgments to recognize the character underneath. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah's encounter with Colonel Rodriguez, and she found herself thinking about their conversation almost daily. The business card he had given her remained tucked into her wallet, handled so often that the corners were beginning to soften. Each time she felt the familiar sting of judgment from customers who disapproved of her appearance, she remembered his words about honor and service. The morning started typically enough. Sarah arrived at Brew and Bean 30 minutes before opening, using the quiet time to prepare for another day of serving coffee and navigating the complex social dynamics that came with working in customer service while visibly different. Derek had already unlocked the door and was reviewing the delivery schedules when she walked in. "Morning, Sarah," he called from behind the counter. "Coffee shipment's running late, but we should be fine with what we have in stock." "No problem," Sarah replied, tying on her apron and beginning her opening routine. Slow start might actually be nice for once. But as it turned out, the morning was anything but slow. By 8 o'clock, the usual rush was in full swing, and Sarah found herself moving efficiently between orders while trying to ignore the familiar stares and whispered comments about her tattoos. The bell above the door chimed, and Sarah looked up to see Marcus Rodriguez entering the coffee shop. He was dressed in a navy suit and carried a leather briefcase, but his professional appearance couldn't completely hide the slight limp that Sarah now knew came from shrapnel wounds sustained during his 3rd deployment. "Colonel Rodriguez," she said with a genuine smile, the first real one she had managed all morning. "Marcus, please," he corrected, approaching the counter with a warm expression. "I was in the neighborhood for a meeting and thought I'd stop by. How have you been?" "Good," Sarah said, then reconsidered. "Actually, that's not entirely true. I've been thinking a lot about our conversation." "In a good way, I hope?" Before Sarah could answer, she noticed that other customers in the coffee shop were beginning to pay attention to their interaction. Marcus's professional demeanor and obvious respect for Sarah created an interesting dynamic that seemed to puzzle some of the regular customers who had grown accustomed to viewing her as simply the tattooed coffee shop employee. "I've been thinking about what you said about continuing to serve in different ways," Sarah said as she prepared Marcus's usual black coffee. "It made me realize that I might be selling myself short by staying here indefinitely. Have you given any thought to what kind of work might interest you?" Sarah handed him the coffee. Noting how his presence seemed to command respect from other customers without him doing anything obvious. There was something about the way he carried himself that suggested authority and competence. "Actually, I have," she said. "I've been looking into programs that help veterans transition to civilian careers. It turns out there's a real need for people who understand the unique challenges that come with readjusting to life outside the military." Marcus's face lit up with interest. "That's exactly the kind of work we do at Veterans Transition Services. Are you thinking about getting additional training in counseling or social work?" "I'm already working on a degree in social work," Sarah explained. "Part-time, evenings mostly. I should finish next year if I can maintain my current course load." "Sarah," Marcus said, setting down his coffee and looking at her seriously, "would you be interested in visiting our offices sometime? I'd love to show you what we do and maybe introduce you to some of our team members. We're always looking for qualified people who understand veteran experiences from the inside." Before Sarah could respond, she became aware that their conversation had drawn the attention of several nearby customers. In particular, she noticed the 3 women from the book club who had made the harsh comments about her tattoos several weeks earlier. They were seated at their usual table, clearly listening to every word. "I would love that," Sarah said, raising her voice slightly to ensure their conversation carried. "When would be a good time? Are you free this Saturday morning? We're having an open house for potential new staff members and community partners. It would be a perfect opportunity for you to see our work and meet the team." The book club women were now openly staring, their expressions confused as they tried to reconcile their previous assumptions about Sarah with the obvious respect being shown by a clearly successful professional. "Saturday sounds perfect," Sarah confirmed, pulling out her phone to make a note. "What time should I be there?" 10 o'clock. "The address is on the card I gave you." Marcus paused, then added in a voice that carried clearly through the coffee shop. "I have to say, Sarah, your military experience and your work toward a social work degree make you exactly the kind of candidate we're hoping to find." "Veterans helping veterans. It's the most effective approach we've discovered." Mrs. Henderson, who had been silent during her companion's earlier eavesdropping, suddenly stood up and approached the counter. Sarah tensed slightly, remembering the previous encounter, but the older woman's demeanor was completely different this time. "Excuse me," Mrs. Henderson said politely. "I couldn't help but overhear. Sarah, did I understand correctly that you're a military veteran?" Sarah glanced at Marcus, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Yes, ma'am. I served with the 101st Airborne as a combat medic for 4 years, including 2 deployments to Afghanistan." The effect on Mrs. Henderson was immediate and profound. Her face flushed with what appeared to be shame, and her eyes filled with tears. "My grandson is deployed right now," she said quietly. "He's a medic with the Army, and we made terrible assumptions about you based on your appearance." "Mrs. Henderson," Sarah began, but the older woman held up her hand. "No, dear, please let me finish. I need to say this." She turned to face her companions, who were watching the scene with obvious discomfort. "We owe you a sincere apology. We judged you without knowing anything about who you are or what you've done for our country." Marcus watched the exchange with interest, but didn't intervene. This was Sarah's moment to handle as she saw fit. "I appreciate that," Sarah said graciously. "But I understand why people make assumptions. Most customers don't have any reason to know about my background." "That's no excuse for what we said," Mrs. Henderson insisted. "My husband was a Korean War veteran, and he would be ashamed of the way we treated you. He always said that service members deserve respect regardless of how they choose to remember their experiences." One of Mrs. Henderson's companions, the woman who had made the harshest comments during the previous encounter, stood up reluctantly and approached the counter. "I owe you an apology too," she said stiffly. "I was completely out of line with my comments about your tattoos." Sarah could see that the apology wasn't coming easily to the woman, but she appreciated the effort nonetheless. "Thank you. That means a lot." The third member of their group remained seated, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but not ready to participate in the apologies. Mrs. Henderson noticed her friend's reluctance and shook her head in disappointment. "Would you mind if I asked about your tattoo?" Mrs. Henderson said. "I'd like to understand what it represents." Sarah rolled up her sleeve fully, displaying the eagle and coordinates with pride, rather than the defensive resignation she usually felt when people asked about her ink. "The eagle represents the 101st Airborne Division," she explained. "The coordinates below it mark the forward operating base where I served during my second deployment. It's my way of ensuring I never forget the people I served with and the experiences that shaped who I am today." Mrs. Henderson studied the tattoo carefully, her grandson's deployment clearly on her mind. "It's beautiful," she said finally, "and meaningful. I'm sorry we didn't take the time to understand that before making judgments." Marcus had been quietly observing the exchange, and now he stepped forward. "Mrs. Henderson, if I may introduce myself, I'm Colonel Marcus Rodriguez, retired Marine Corps. I served in the same region where Sarah was deployed, and I can tell you that medics like her saved countless lives during some very difficult times." The impact of having a retired Marine colonel vouching for Sarah was immediately apparent. Mrs. Henderson's respect was obvious, and even her reluctant companion seemed to recognize the significance of Marcus's endorsement. "I had no idea," Mrs. Henderson said, looking back at Sarah with new eyes. "When I think about my grandson over there, knowing that there are medics like you taking care of our service members, it means everything." The coffee shop had grown quiet during the exchange, with other customers clearly listening to the conversation. Sarah realized that this moment represented something larger than just an apology from a few judgmental customers. It was an opportunity to educate people about the reality of modern military service and the diverse ways that veterans carry their experiences into civilian life. "Mrs. Henderson," Sarah said, "would you mind if I shared your grandson's story with our team at Veterans Transition Services? We work with military families as well as veterans themselves, and we might be able to provide some resources or support during his deployment." "You would do that?" Mrs. Henderson asked, surprised. "Of course. Supporting military families is part of supporting our service members. Deployment is hard on everyone, not just the person who's deployed." Marcus smiled proudly at Sarah's response, recognizing the natural instinct to serve that had driven her military career and was now guiding her toward veteran services work. "Sarah," he said, "I think you're going to be a tremendous asset to our organization." The rest of the morning passed quickly, with several customers approaching Sarah to thank her for her service or ask questions about her military experience. The atmosphere in the coffee shop felt different, more respectful, more understanding. Derek mentioned that he had never seen customers engage with Sarah in such a positive way. During her lunch break, Sarah found herself thinking about the morning's events and the upcoming visit to Veterans Transition Services. For the first time since her discharge, she felt like she might have found a path forward that would allow her to use her military experience in meaningful ways. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. "This morning confirmed what I suspected when we first met. You have natural instincts for helping people navigate difficult transitions. I'm excited to show you what we do on Saturday." Sarah responded, "Thank you for giving me the confidence to be open about my service. This morning felt like a turning point." "It was," came his immediate reply. "Get ready for the next chapter." Saturday morning arrived with unseasonably warm weather and clear skies. Sarah dressed carefully for her visit to Veterans Transition Services, choosing clothes that were professional but not too formal. She left her tattoos visible, no longer feeling the need to hide them. The organization's offices were housed in a renovated warehouse in a revitalized part of downtown. The building was impressive but not ostentatious, with large windows and an open design that felt welcoming rather than institutional. Marcus met her in the lobby, which was decorated with photos of veterans who had successfully transitioned to civilian careers through the organization's programs. Sarah studied the images as they walked, noting the diversity of ages, backgrounds, and career paths represented. "We serve everyone from recent discharged personnel to veterans who've been out of the military for years but are struggling with career transitions," Marcus explained. "Our approach is comprehensive. Everything from job training and placement to mental health support and family services." He led her through a series of offices and meeting rooms, each designed to feel comfortable rather than clinical. In one room, a group session was underway with veterans discussing workplace challenges. In another, individual career counseling was taking place. "This is our peer counseling program," Marcus said, gesturing toward a room where two veterans were engaged in deep conversation. "We've found that veterans often respond better to guidance from people who've been through similar experiences." "That makes sense," Sarah said. "There's an immediate level of trust and understanding when you're talking to someone who's been where you've been." They continued the tour, visiting the job training facilities, the mental health services area, and the family support center. At each stop, Marcus introduced Sarah to staff members, many of whom were veterans themselves. The atmosphere was professional but warm, with an underlying sense of mission that reminded Sarah of the best aspects of military service. "Sarah," Marcus said as they concluded the tour in his office. I want to offer you a position. Sarah blinked in surprise. I haven't even applied for anything yet. You don't need to. I've seen enough over the past few weeks to know that you'd be perfect for our peer counseling program. You could work part-time while finishing your degree, then transition to full-time with additional responsibilities once you graduate. Marcus, I don't know what to say. This is incredibly generous, but it's not generosity, he interrupted. It's recognition of talent and experience that we desperately need. Our most successful counselors are people like you, veterans who've successfully navigated their own transitions and can help others do the same. Sarah looked out the window at the city below, thinking about the coffee shop where she had been working, the customers who judged her appearance, the sense that she was underutilizing her skills and experience. What would my responsibilities include? She asked. Individual counseling sessions with veterans who are struggling with civilian transitions, group facilitation for our peer support programs, outreach to military families who need resources and support. Eventually, as you complete your degree, you'd take on case management responsibilities and possibly program development. And you think I'm qualified for this kind of work? Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying her seriously. Sarah, you spent 4 years as a combat medic, including 2 deployments in active combat zones. You made life-and-death decisions under pressure while taking care of people who were depending on you for survival. You've successfully navigated your own transition to civilian life, including pursuing higher education while working to support yourself. And most importantly, you have the emotional intelligence and natural empathy that makes people trust you with their stories. Sarah felt tears building in her eyes as she listened to Marcus's assessment. It had been a long time since someone had recognized her military service as valuable preparation for civilian work, rather than something to overlook or work around. There's one more thing, Marcus continued. Mrs. Henderson called our office yesterday. She wanted to make a donation to support our family services program, specifically in honor of your service and to help military families like her grandsons. She did what? Her exact words were that meeting you made her realize how much she had to learn about modern military service, and she wanted to contribute to programs that support veterans and their families. Sarah laughed, shaking her head in amazement. 3 weeks ago, she was complaining about my tattoos to my manager. And now she's donating money to help other veterans because she was impressed by your character and your commitment to service. That's the kind of impact you can have when people take the time to see past surface appearances. Sarah looked down at her tattoo, visible below the sleeve of her blouse. The eagle's wings seemed appropriate for this moment, a symbol of strength and freedom ready to soar into something new. Marcus, she said, meeting his eyes directly, I would be honored to accept your offer. Excellent. When can you start? I need to give Derek 2 weeks' notice at the coffee shop. He's been good to me, and I don't want to leave him in a difficult position. Of course. That shows exactly the kind of character and integrity we value here. As they worked out the details of her employment, Sarah felt a sense of excitement and purpose that she hadn't experienced since her military service. This felt right in a way that serving coffee never had. This felt like coming home. 2 weeks later, Sarah worked her final shift at Brew and Bean. The day had been busy, but several customers had stopped by specifically to wish her well in her new position. Mrs. Henderson had brought her grandson's unit some care packages and asked Sarah to help coordinate delivery through Veterans Transition Services Military Family Support Network. As Sarah hung up her apron for the last time, Derek approached with an envelope. The staff took up a collection, he said. We wanted to get you something for your new office. Sarah opened the envelope to find a gift certificate to a local art gallery, along with a card signed by all of her co-workers. The message inside read, Thank you for showing us what real service looks like. We're proud to have worked alongside you. Derek, this is too much, Sarah protested, but he waved away her objections. "You're going to do amazing things in your new job," he said. "And whenever you want coffee, you know where to find us." As Sarah walked out of Brew and Bean for the last time, she felt the weight of transition settling around her. It was scary and exciting and full of possibility. She thought about the path that had led her here, from military service to coffee shop work to veteran services, and realized that every experience had prepared her for what came next. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Ready for your first day tomorrow?" Sarah looked down at her tattoo, then typed back, "Semper Fidelis, always faithful to the mission." "See you at 800 hours, came his reply. Sarah smiled as she walked to her car. 800 hours. Military time. She was going back to work with people who spoke her language, understood her experiences, and valued what she had to offer. The next morning, Sarah arrived at Veterans Transition Services, wearing a professional blazer with her sleeves deliberately rolled up, her tattoo clearly visible. She was ready to help other veterans navigate their own transitions, to share her story as a source of strength rather than something to hide. As she walked through the lobby, past the photos of successfully transitioned veterans, Sarah realized that soon her own picture might be on that wall. Not as someone who had been helped by the organization, but as someone whose military service had prepared her to help others find their way home. The eagle on her arm caught the morning light streaming through the windows, and Sarah felt the familiar surge of pride that came with wearing her service openly. Today, that service would continue in a new form, helping her fellow veterans find the same sense of purpose and belonging that had guided her to this moment. She was home.